Enough being friendly, gotta shut it down. This is church, what are you thinking? No, that's good. My name is Alan Weissenbacher. For those that don't know me, I have a background in the biological sciences. I also have a pastoral degree, and then I worked many years as a counselor at a drug and alcohol rehabilitation facility for homeless people, doing counseling there. And then at a point, God was leading me to something new, so I left that job, came out to Berkeley, and I'm in a PhD program where we combine our science background with some topic in Christianity. Berkeley's one of the couple universities that have this kind of program. And I'm doing work on neurobiology and spiritual formation, spiritual change. We're spiritual people, we're also biological people. And so how does an understanding of our brain and our bodies impact how we approach spiritual matters? And so Earl asked me to talk about today that whole aspect. That's what I'm studying, how it relates to transformation, and the idea of, can people change? Can I change? Can an old dog learn new tricks? And what does this mean for my brain? First, before I get into some of the more technical stuff, when I talk to my former clients, there's two types of programs for change that you find in the Bible. First, you have the Paul program of change. And with my clients, this was the type of change that everyone wanted. This was the holy zapping kind of change where you're one way one moment, and then God just intervenes directly in your life, and you're another way the next moment. Yes, it happens. There are cases in the Bible where it happens. It happened to me once where I was depressed for a little while, and I was praying on my drive to work, and I remember right at the corner of Timberline and Harmony in Fort Collins, sitting at a red light, I just felt God's presence with me, and then that depression stuff that I was managing with around that time just went away. I got a Paul program. Thank you, Lord. But that is rare and doesn't happen very often. Often God puts you in, and us in, the Jacob program. Jacob in the Bible, Paul, he was on the road to Damascus, saw a shining light from heaven. Jesus appeared to him saying, "Why are you persecuting me?" And Paul says, and changes and becomes a totally new person on fire for God, and then goes from a persecutor of the church to the author of many books of the New Testament. Jacob, the other type of program, his name meant deceiver. He was that way in his childhood, cheating and messing with people. He cheated his brother out of his birthright, his inheritance, and then took off because his brother was mad. So Jacob's like, "I'm out of here." And then God saw fit to move Jacob into a situation where he worked for a guy for 14 years. He wanted this woman's hand in marriage, and so the guy, Laban, said, "Okay, if you work for me for 7 years, you can have her hand in marriage." And so he works for 7 years. He says, "Just kidding, I'm giving you her sister. You have to work 7 more years if you want the original one you wanted." Laban was deceiving Jacob as Jacob had deceived other people. So Jacob was on the receiving end of things for 14 years of slowly changing. After his 14 years of servitude to this one gentleman, he had enough change, and he wrestled with God, and God changed his name to Israel. He became a new person, but it took 14 years. Doesn't that seem like if there's issues in your life that you're struggling with, that's often where God has us? Or my former clients, they would stay at a rehabilitation farm for 1 to 2 years. Sure, you pray for the holy zapping, but let's do the hard work. Because most aspects of our lives, and even though God gave me a Paul program in one small area of my life, I'm on the Jacob program everywhere else. Moving on to a little riddle. Some of you have heard this before. Where I used to work at this rehabilitation facility, there was a group of addicts who would have a craving every 2 weeks like clockwork. So they were in a rehabilitation facility, not going anywhere, but we could almost time it on our watch. Okay, it's been 2 weeks, bam, and this whole segment of the population gets a craving. Any idea why?
Payday.
Exactly. Payday. Somehow, this person's brain, that segment of the population were the addicts that were able to hold a job during their addiction. And so they were used to getting paid every 2 weeks. And then when you would get paid, you would go out and buy your drugs. And the body had wired its internal time clock to the knowledge of getting drugs and to those craving feelings. And so even though they were no longer employed, and hadn't been for a long time, their body still responded to that because it becomes so wired in them. Oh, it's 2 weeks now. You need to go out and get your drug. It took us a while to figure that out. Even the people who were experiencing it didn't quite know what was going on. But aha, we figured it out. To explain this, we look at the connections involved. First on the side, like rapid conversions. So if you're looking at the Saul to Paul program, Paul's quick aspect of change, the brain can change that way. God has designed our brains for that to be a possibility. I'm not going to go into technical stuff, but it has to do with chaotic, nonlinear dynamics for those who are well-versed in physics. Basically, for those who saw Jurassic Park way back when, they talk about chaos theory and how a butterfly can flutter its wings in one area of the world and create a hurricane somewhere else. The brain can work that way. You can have a small change in your brain, and it can become rapidly amplified to a hurricane somewhere else. A small change can be amplified to a very big one very quickly. Also, if you're in some kind of crisis, the brain has its normal resting state of operation. Of the usual thoughts, it bounces around and its typical patterns that you've developed through time. You get into a crisis, it's like when my 2-year-old sees this block building and goes, crash! And the crisis can really upset the equilibrium, and then when the brain settles back down to a new resting state, it's different. It reforms in a different way. And that's why in church history you hear about people in crisis moments praying to God. St. Augustine in a great big storm falls on his knees and says, "Dear Lord, help me." And he has this big life transformation. A crisis can often shake the brain up enough that by the time when it reforms itself, it's a new pattern. And God can help put you in those circumstances to shake things up. Those rapid changes can happen. But then to gradual change, most change occurs slowly. The Bible says, work out your own salvation. Sure, you've received Jesus, you believe in him. Then Paul talks about, so why am I still doing all the things I don't want to do? Why do I still struggle? So you have to work out your salvation, the gradual process of taking what God has given you and cooperating with God to begin to move it into all aspects of your life. This is biological. Two particular phrases that come to mind is that neurons that fire together wire together, and use it or lose it. So two common phrases that talk about how your brain can work. Basically, neurons are what transfer your thoughts. And say you have say you have your neurons that think about Jesus, and your neurons that think about the sandwich you're going to have for lunch, and the neurons that think about whatever, your significant other. Neurons deal with different things, but if two separate thought processes often occur together, your brain will think, oh, okay, we'll make things more efficient and just stick them together on a biological level. The neurons will grow together and work together that way. And so, for example, I was talking to this one Catholic woman that was telling me she literally felt sick whenever she would try to pray the rosary. For those who don't know, in Catholic circles, it's a string of beads, and you move it through your fingers, and every time you touch a new bead, you say a new prayer. But she couldn't do it. Didn't know why. And just talking with her about her life, and then she shared that growing up, when she was a little girl, whenever she would do something bad, her parents would punish her by making her pray the rosary. And so in her mind, even though she wasn't aware of it anymore, her body had wired all those feelings of punishment to prayer. And so whenever she tried to approach prayer, she'd have all those punishment feelings come up. The brain put those two things together. So don't use spiritual things to punish your children. I heard a youth pastor who said, yeah, whenever the kids in youth group are bad, I make them read Chronicles. And I said, don't do that. They'll grow up and not want to read the Bible and not know why. So neurons that fire together, wire together, it's this explanation of why those addicts every 2 weeks would get the craving, because the internal time clock wired to payday and wired to cravings and addiction. There's also use it or lose it. You find that if you've known a foreign language and haven't practiced it in a while, and you don't remember as much anymore, use it or lose it. It's like a muscle. Parts of your brain, ways of thinking, if you don't practice it, you lose it. For example, say you've really, really practiced your thought processes on impure thoughts. You've taken a small neural pathway and turned it into a giant highway through practice. Neurons grow stronger the more you use them. It's like one end of a neuron ends in a little cup and the other ends in a ball. And the more you practice, it grows closer. Neurotransmitters grow more frequent, and it begins to fire a lot faster than any other thought. So whenever you find yourself looking at a member of the opposite sex, if you strengthen that neuron, the first thought that's going to come to mind is an impure one. Because you've created it into a 4-lane, 6-lane, 10-lane highway in your brain. It'll be fastest. But if, as Paul says, take control of your mind, renew your mind, works on a physical level, and deliberately think of other things, you can lose it. And all of a sudden your 8-lane highway becomes a 4-lane, a 2-lane, and it's back to the small road. I use it or lose it. And it means you have to take control of your own thought processes. As Paul says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's not just a spiritual topic, it's a physical one. Turning to care. Yep. And so how do you do that? Turning to new things, making your unconscious work for you. Character formation. There's an example that's often used in the literature about a ski hill or a sledding hill. Say you go out first thing in the morning after a snowstorm. It's all pristine new snow. And you take your sled, you slide down it, you can pretty much go wherever you want to. The hill is yours. But you spend all day sledding, by the end of the day you'll have created some deep grooves. And so by 4 p.m., you take your sled and start to head off down the hill, you can no longer go where you want to go. You'll often fall into an old track and follow that one down. That's how it is in your brain. That's the example that's very common in the literature, where when you're starting something new, you can create your own pathways. But do things a while, you create a habit, and it's an old track that gets laid down on the physical level in your brain. You can fall into it and keep doing what you don't want to do. But if you do it right and do the things you want to do, you can create the good habits. That's what they call virtue. On to the next slide. How you choose to live your life has a physical, structural, and functional effect on the brain. And the next slide. Continued action. So you can repeat something long enough, it becomes automatic. You can create your own determinism in your life. The habits, the things that just come automatically. In some literature it talks about you create your own subconscious. And so Another good example I like to use is learning to drive. When you're first learning to drive, you have to focus and concentrate on everything. Every turn signal, every turn of the wheel, everything around you, you're concentrating, you're paying active attention. Drive for 10 years, you can head home on autopilot. I don't have to worry about the signals, it all just comes automatically. It's no longer something that has to be in your conscious mind. It's something you've learned consciously. I've done it so much that it begins to just sink down to the more subconscious level and you can just do things automatic. It's that way in all aspects of our life. One researcher calls this a mental butler. And so once you do something long enough, you give it to the butler to do at your subconscious level. And then you only become aware again when something unexpected happens while driving, say a ball bounces in the road. Uh-oh, I have to now pay active attention. And so the next slide. We can end up really creating a lot of problems for ourselves through how we've created our subconscious. And it's not always just us. We can move to the next slide. It's not always just us. A lot of times some of this comes from the people we hang out with, the influences we're given, how we've been raised. A lot of this is our own actions and what we choose, and a lot of this is sometimes what happens with the deck we've been dealt. The good news is, our unconscious and subconscious, it's not completely fixed forever. You can turn an old dog, you can teach an old dog new tricks, you can learn new habits, you can break old ones. First, if it's a new snow hill, learn and form it the way you want it to. So if I'm going to be learning to drive, I want to make sure I do all my things correctly so that the habits become the right ones. Get sloppy when I'm learning to drive, it's going to become automatic, and then the sloppy part will be forever. Like I learned when I was learning to drive, I tend to brake late, and that's a habit. I'm not an early braker, I'm a later braker, which annoys my wife. Brake sooner. But if you learn it right the first time, you don't have to try to change. Then it doesn't take the conscious effort. But to change habitual unconscious patterns takes time and emotional struggle. Here's the good news. Any kind of resistance helps. If there's something you're doing that you don't want to do, and say, okay, I can resist it. I've resisted for 10 minutes today, and then I gave in. Okay, I'm throwing in the towel, I'm giving up hope, it's never going to change. You know, that 10 minutes of resistance has helped. Maybe the next day you can make it 11 minutes. And it's this biological process of this highway. The resistance is loosening up the neuron, and so it gets easier through time. Or in the case of forming a good habit, someone tells me, I hear all these people who talk about they get up at 5 a.m. and they pray for 3 hours. I can't pray for 10 minutes. I'm a failure as a Christian. I might as well go down the road to that other place. No, you can't expect to run a marathon the first time you go out and try to run. It's the same thing if you're trying to change the physical level of your brain to handle lots of prayer. Start with the 5 minutes. Any amount helps, and it can grow. It's like exercise. Those two little sources up there, those are fascinating. Has to do with imagination. In one study, they asked 2 groups. This group, go out and physically exercise. This group, we want you to stay home, and while that group's exercising, I just want you to think about exercising. Don't actually move. You can stay on your couch, but just think about all the movements of exercise that other group is doing. At the end of the study, they tested both groups. Granted, the ones that did the full exercise got the full benefit. Those that imagined exercising showed an improvement over those that did absolutely nothing. and thought about other things. So just imagining exercise, I mean, sorry to say, you still have, for the full benefit, you still have to do real exercise. But there was some benefit just thinking about it. The imagination was that powerful. The second study up there was on music. They had one group of people practice playing the piano. Another group, just fold your hands in your lap and think about and imagine playing the piano. At the end of this session, both groups show the same level of improvement. The imagination people and the physical practicing people. Yep, I see Will. It's because both imagining practicing in this case the piano, imagining practicing the piano and and actually playing the piano both activated the exact same parts of the brain. The imagination activates the same part as actually doing it. And so the brain that dealt with the playing improved in both groups. The imagination is a powerful thing. And so if you're trying to change and transform, as Paul says, whatever is good, noble, pure, think of these things. The imagination is incredibly powerful. The Bible's told us this for years, and now we're showing studies about it. What are you thinking about, and is that in line with how you want to change? That's my one criticism in addiction circles of Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. They spend a lot of time saying, I'm an addict. So what is that doing? Granted, it is important to remember that this person deals with certain issues, and to remind yourself you should be going to do certain things, to go to certain places, because you're at greater risk than someone who's not an addict. But if you continually tell yourself that, to me, it seems like you're reinforcing the thoughts, the addiction thoughts, at a certain level. Sure, remind yourself that, okay, I have some weaknesses I need to be careful of, but don't dwell on it so much, and instead find something new to dwell on, such as getting involved in some powerful way to help someone else. AA does add that in mentoring, but add more. Get involved in some sort of social justice issue, in transforming the world for good. That engages your imagination and can start to strengthen the nerve pathways that deal with loving and caring for other people, so that it fires a lot faster than any type of introspective, selfish addiction thinking. Next one. Or even with praise and worship. I've heard some people say, why does God want all this praise and worship? Is God that self-centered? Yes, praise me. Let me grant it. He is God. But also, this is for us. It's not narcissism by God, but it's by doing all this praise and worship, we create these nerve pathways that can actually start relating to God. Think about God. It's like, okay, now you're having a brain where I can really start working more with you. It's a way your memory and mind can connect with the eternal by doing this. Turning some other practical application, talking about how do we replace, strengthen, encourage neural pathways. And here's the direct quote, Romans 12:2. Be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. Sometimes good choices don't even come to mind unless you're trained and have been practicing what God wants you to. Some other types of practical application, pastoral counseling. Talked about neurons that fire together, wire together. Memories of trauma can be linked with your emotions. For example, something really bad happens to you, all those negative feelings become linked to those memories. But if you find a good Christian counselor and start talking about these things in a safe setting, or sharing your testimony in a supportive atmosphere, you can start de-linking these memories from the pain, and by telling them in safe settings, these memories all of a sudden now link to the safe feelings of sharing a testimony in a good setting or talking to a counselor. And so you can de-link a memory from trauma to safety. And so you hear people talk about, I used to not be able to talk about that, but now I can. They've done that brain transfer. The next one, what about sinning? Here's this question. The Bible talks about at what point when a thought temptation comes to mind does it become a thought sin? Am I sinning every time something bad comes to my mind? And I have a good imagination. A lot of bad things can come to my mind. And so am I sinning every time? This is my take. The Bible's not incredibly clear on where that line is. But it seems to me that when a thought first comes up, that's temptation. But it's how long do I hold on to it? If I hold on to it long enough, it engages that imagination. It starts changing who I am in my character at a very physical level, the longer I hold on to it. And so my particular take, and you can decide on this for yourself, is that I think that first comes up as a temptation, but if I hold on to it long enough so it becomes part of who I am, then that becomes a sin. But if I take control of the thought, first comes up, nope, think of something else, then I resisted temptation and I've moved on to something else, and we're good. Forgiveness. We talk about linked emotions. Someone hurts me really badly, I'm going to get angry. That's a natural reaction to being hurt. But if I continually think about this person in anger, what's going to happen is those anger feelings at a physical level are going to start becoming linked to every time I think about this person. And so now I think, oh, you, and it just always happens. The anger becomes linked. And so at some point, I get the conviction of God, I forgive this person, and then I wonder, have I really forgiven them because I still feel so angry? The answer is yes, you have. But you still have the residue of all that anger to deal with. Sometimes you have to forgive someone again and again and again and again. I mean, in God's eyes, you've forgiven them, you're not going to retaliate. But to change your emotions, you have to start thinking about different things in regard to that person. Maybe pray for them. To pray for your enemies. That can change your emotions. Delinking the anger and the person takes time. So just give everyone, take a breath of relief, that yes, just because you're still angry, it's a process. You can work with God and change. You don't have to beat yourself up over it. Just work with God. Or, another idea, dark night of the soul. This is a particular term in Christian history that describes, okay, I've had this great time of growth and relating to God, and all of a sudden I hit this incredible dry spell. I've heard it in more modern circles described as you have this great big mountaintop experience, and then all of a sudden you go down to this valley. Why? What did I do wrong? Can't I stay on the mountaintop forever? Well, the disciples said that, and Jesus said, no. No, you can't. But the dry spells, my particular take, when you look at it biologically, I mean, granted, sometimes a dry spell is because you're not doing what you need to be doing. So you have to examine that first. Am I still connecting with God? Am I still walking the way I need to walk? But if all that's okay, and I still have this dry spell, then it could be a time of just, okay, you've learned all this new stuff, you had this incredible period of growth, and now you need to make it yours. It needs to consolidate in the brain, become a deep part of who you are. Phase of, okay, God's going to work under the surface for a little while so you can be prepared for the next big step of growth. Physical rehabilitation works that way too. You'll often see great growth, a plateau, great growth, plateau. If someone stops in the plateau area and thinks, oh, I don't see any growth happening. Oh, whatever, I'm going to stop my exercises. then they never get to the next area of rehabilitation growth. They get stuck right there. So a dry spell, if you keep doing what you're supposed to, could be preparation for the next step. Or practical takeaway for transformation. Looking at the biological as well as the spiritual together. First of all, you can change at any age and any time. The brain is, they call it plastic. A number of years ago, they thought the brain was like a machine, a computer. Okay, sure, it changes when you're little and growing, but once you stop growing, then the brain is fixed forever. No. They know that the brain can change all the way well into elderly adulthood and even change up to the point of death. There is hope for anyone. Granted, if you're older, you have a snow hill that may have more furrows and habits. It may take some more effort, but change can happen. Another encouragement, any amount of effort spent toward changing is helpful. If your effort and failing, don't be discouraged, keep trying. Another time, have patience with change. Sure, pray for the Paul program, but don't be discouraged if you're on the Jacob program. Have patience with change. It takes time for the body to assimilate and accomplish a lot of it. And then be deliberate about your thought and imagination. It can help or hurt you. Or, I'm going to spend a lot of time tonight thinking about exercise. Imagination can help or hurt. Here's another little side note on transforming love. Say, okay, I have these problems, I have these habits. How do I start changing? This is actually based on research done right here at UC Berkeley at the Freeman Neuroscience Center. It's called Transforming Love. And what they've done is they've looked at people who get into a new relationship or new parents. And the love that just blossoms in this new relationship. And they've realized that certain chemicals are released in your brain when you get into a new relationship, either as a parent or as a romantic partner. Chemicals are released that they call unlearning chemicals that actually serve to weaken and lessen these neural bonds that deal with habits and ways of going about and doing things in the world. So it helps you unlearn. And it's fascinating. It's the way God has designed us, that if you're in a new relationship, you have to learn how to adjust your life to accommodate theirs. And when you become a new parent, you have to learn a lot of new skills very quickly. And all the ways you used to do things get totally rearranged, and you have to learn new ways of doing things. But your body has a hard time learning all that the natural way. It needs some extra help to be able to learn so fast. And so God has made brains to release these unlearning chemicals to help clear some real estate so that new habits can be learned. You might have seen this. If someone gets into a relationship, they don't seem to be thinking straight. Yeah. Some of that is biological. Or those of you that may be parents or know some people who become parents, have heard the phrase mommy brain. It's not just sleep deprivation. Some of this is neurological. Some of your old brain pathways are getting a little mushy because the chemical's there, which means you can learn new things very quickly. Side note, this does not mean you can learn a new foreign language really quickly. It's like, oh great, I had a kid, now I'm going to learn French. It's not that kind of learning. It's a kind of learning of new skills and new habits. And so, what I suggest is they haven't tested this yet, and so this is a challenge, test it, for those that are scientists. For people that want to change and learn new skills, if they're actively out engaged in loving God and other people, can the same thing happen? Are you more open to changing old habits if you're out doing loving actions for other people? Because it's the love of the new parent or new relationship that starts these chemicals flowing. They haven't tested other loves. The Bible has a rich history of other kinds of loving. And so to think, if I want to change, maybe I should be out engaged. Well, first of all, start working on growing my love of God. And 2, start working on doing things to demonstrate and grow my love of other people. And that can become a platform of changing habits too. Of cooperating with God. Say, okay, God, this is where I'm at. How am I going to change my life? Well, maybe let's start getting involved in the good things, taking control of my imagination, putting in all kinds of effort against the things I want to change, putting lots of effort into the things that are good, and then actively loving God's children, actively in the world, seems to be the place to really open yourself up to the most transformation from God, and working with God to let God work with him. So that was what Earl wanted me to talk about, the biological level of change. There was a lot of different topics just thrown out. Any particular questions? Hmm?
What about
Can someone hear what's being said in the back?
singularity something? Yeah, like, like the thought that the theory of that's old but let's say you can't do it, it might be essential singularity.
I'll go back into the question and repeat it for everyone. The question was, what if your brain system is set up in such a way that you try to fix one thing and then everything seems to fall apart? And so, okay, I tried to get right in this one area and then everything goes crazy. Yes, that can happen because a lot of things in the brain are all linked together. I talked about it being this chaotic system, flap butterfly wings in one area, this whole area, other things change. Yes. Sometimes you start on the path of change. I use an example from C.S. Lewis. He talked about, okay, I wanted to let Jesus into my life to do a little bit of, to put a new coat of paint in my house and maybe change the tile. And then he says, all of a sudden Jesus just moves in and he brings a sledgehammer and he's starting to knock down walls and do the roof. It's like, I just wanted a new coat of paint and some tile. And all of a sudden the whole house is demolished. And it hurt. It hurt a lot. Be prepared, change can happen that way. But it is a good thing. Things can fall apart. You want to change one area, all of a sudden a lot of other things can end up realizing that those need to be changed too. And next thing you know, you're getting an entire remodel instead of a new coat of paint. Things can get more difficult before they get better. That often happened with the addicts I worked with, because just trying to work on the addiction all of a sudden exposed a whole root system dealing with many different aspects of life. It's like, I just wanted to get rid of the addiction. I didn't want to have to work on my relationships with everyone, all kinds of past history, all kinds of new thoughts and stories that are coming up. This is a mess and it's scary. But yes, it's part of the healing process, and understand that if you keep at it, hopefully with finding appropriate support people, professional and friends, that the whole house remodel, keep going through the storm of these things all falling apart. And you can find yourself, as C.S. Lewis said, he did this remodel, it hurt, but now I have a gigantic mansion. I went through all the healing and through all the scary stuff, and the end was beautiful. Thank you for the question.